People feared if they crossed Fred would find out their deepest, darkest secret. He would publish it in a fax, and if he couldn't find one, he would make it up, and he would publish it.
Fred Phelps, no relation to the swimmer, the man, the myth, the legend.
You're gonna eat your babies!
For those of you unfamiliar, old Freddy Boy was the guy that founded the Westboro Baptist Church. Everyone's favorite, not quite a cult. Today I thought we'd discuss some of the weirder aspects of old Fred, I swear I'm not gay Phelps, and indeed even some of his slightly
redeeming qualities?
See, as much of a toxic incel as old Freddy Phelps was, he was also capable of a few surprises. First, a quick refresher if you don't completely remember what exactly the Westboro Baptist Church was. Way back in the late 90s and very early 2000s, the church began making a name for itself by picketing the funerals of fallen soldiers and victims of hate crimes. Some of the other more notable moments in their low-light reel is protesting with signs so vile they would later become Kanye West lyrics.
I see good things about Hitler also.
And even saying things like, "We deserve 9/11," which wouldn't end up becoming cool until years later.
So, you said America deserved 9/11. Did you mean that?
Yeah.
It was these kinds of practices that brought a lot of attention, and literally all of it was negative. In the early days of the 24-hour news cycle, it was the perfect sideshow where both sides of the political aisle and everyone on every spectrum could gather together to relentlessly mock and point at the weirdos.
What's the matter with you?
What's the matter?
What is the matter with you?
I actually have to stop here and give a special shout out to Louis Theroux. I highly recommend pretty much everything he's ever made, but his documentaries on the Westboro Baptist Church are especially amazing.
Who is the bitch? The baby? No, it's the woman.
Each documentary chronicles his staying with the WBC at a very specific point in their timeline. In the early years when people were just finding out about them, the middle period when they were at peak notoriety and starting to lose some members, until finally the period after Fred Phelps had died, where most of the women were removed from roles of power, and the teachings had been watered down to just being a slightly stricter church than your average Baptist. Seriously, the amount of family members that left the church between the start and end of the documentary is pretty staggering, and his interviews with Shirley Phelps are truly something to behold. All that said, while watching the documentaries and even just being vaguely aware of the WBC through cultural osmosis, the question that has nagged at the back of many people's minds since the beginning is, how exactly are they paying for all this? The answer? Lawsuits, baby! One of the benefits of being wildly unpopular is a tendency to get random people to want to attack you. This was often the case with the WBC. Here's an excerpt from an article by NPR. The protests are in themselves a source of income, according to Potek. Over the years, the Phelpses have filed lawsuits against communities that have tried to stop them from demonstrating. The church does not disclose how much money it makes from litigations, but some of the cases have been well documented. In the 1990s, the WBC sued the city of Topeka several times for not providing the group protection during protests. They won $43,000 in legal fees. The WBC in 1995 more than $100,000 from a lawsuit against the Kansas Funeral Picketing Act because it was a violation of the First Amendment. Since the family represented themselves, all that money went back to the church. The important thing here to remember is that the Westboro Baptist Church, in addition to being a family of weirdos, is also a family of lawyers. Essentially, they made a good bit of money from people suing them for being awful, which is unfortunately their legal right. In fact, almost all members of the Phelps family have some form of law degree or experience in a law firm in a secretarial position. In fact, most members of the family are lawyers or have some form of law degree. In fact, they have a very well-respected firm in Topeka. People in town said, well, we don't like them, but if we want to win a case, we'll go to them. Now, I know what you're thinking, but I don't think they have any secret donations from trolls or weirdos, or at least not enough of them that are worth talking about. Church spokeswoman Phyllis Roper says their booming employment and family law practice pays the bills for their travels across the country, where they shout their anti-gay message. They travel in vans to keep down the costs, which she says can add up to $200,000 a year. Do they have secret contributors? Phelps Roper is adamant they do not. We all work and we all pay our own way. We don't ask for anything from anyone, and we don't take anything from anyone. The ultimate display of their ability would of course be their Supreme Court victory, which honestly is just pretty upsetting to read about, so I'm not going to cover it here. Ultimately, this might just add another layer of disappointment. All those brains, knowledge, and tenacity, the ability to stick through anything, and they're using it to attack the families of fallen soldiers. If only they could use that power for good. Say, I don't know, a more worthy cause, like the civil rights movement? What? Bang bang. Pow, plot twist. What if I told you that Fredward middle name Phelps actually started his career as a civil rights lawyer in Kansas in the 60s? For those of you that just go, yes, the South in the 60s, what a time. No, you don't get it. This was Topeka, Kansas, the same year that Brown versus Board of Education went down. Fred Phelps was a civil rights lawyer in the Deep South on the cutting edge of integration. By the time Phelps moved to Topeka in 1954, it had become a launching ground for the modern civil rights movement. This was the year the U.S. Supreme Court banned segregation in public schools with its historic Brown versus Topeka Board of Education decision. Back in that era, most black attorneys were busy trying to make a living. Says Alexander, became the first black person elected to the city of Topeka as a member of the Topeka City Commission. Black lawyers couldn't take those cases because of the chance they wouldn't get paid, but Fred was willing to take those cases. Douglas, the Topeka civil rights activist and former fire chief, says Phelps was such a brilliant attorney that he made enemies. He made fortunes on all those cases, Douglas says. All the businesses hated him because he was so successful. I think if they discriminated against Martians, he would have done those cases. He could make money. What's particularly nonsensical about this plot twist is how it makes so much sense. Having people hate them is nothing new for Phelps and his family. People shot out their windows and would threaten Fred Phelps because he stood up for black people in Kansas. After her father delivered an editorial on local television one night bemoaning white racism, Shirley Phelps says the phone rang. I picked up the phone, somebody is screaming in my ear. That sticks with you. That's not the first time nor the last time I heard that. Growing up fighting militant white racists for your whole life is somewhat impressive. And to be honest, it explains a lot about how they were able to deal with the being hated by everybody, for an unpopular opinion. Still, it's more than a little confusing comparing the Fred Phelps of the past to the Fred Phelps of today. I don't know him anymore, says Joe Douglas Jr., an African-American activist in Topeka who became the city's first fire department chief. I see him out there and I hear the venom that comes out of his mouth. If you had asked me in the 1960s if he would do this, I would have said never. The Reverend Ben Scott, president of the NAACP's Topeka branch, says he never heard Phelps talk about homosexuality during his work as a civil rights attorney. I didn't even know he was a preacher, Scott said. But if you ask the Phelps, they have a simple answer. That's because there's this distinct difference between gay people and black people, says Shirley Phelps Roper. You're born black. It's something you can't change even if you're Michael Jackson. God never said it was an abomination to be black. Now, it's worth noting that winning civil rights cases doesn't necessarily translate to certified woke bae. In fact, his exact feelings on the matter are still somewhat in debate. According to his son Nathan Phelps, they would come into his office, and after they left, he would talk about how stupid they were and call them dumb. But Shirley Phelps Roper, Nathan's sister, says their father was no racist. She says that Paddock doesn't know her father, and she calls her brother Nathan a rebel of God. She says her father didn't use racist language, and Nathan would not have been in a position to even know about it. Nathan is a tortured soul, she says. He has no grace. God has no mercy upon him. He's hardened his heart. The only reason I kind of believe her story on this is because why would she lie? I mean, it's very clear everyone hates her. Having the label of racist isn't really going to do anything. So she doesn't really have anything to lose by saying, yeah, my dad was racist, whatever. Still, despite this, it's worth noting that Fred Phelps was never particularly liked anywhere he went. Looking at a timeline of notable events in his life, it's clear that even at his very best, he was a bit of a prick. In 1964, Phelps earns a law degree from Washburn University in Topeka, but has trouble joining the state bar when no judges are willing to vouch for his good character, the normal procedure under Kansas law. Phelps overcomes this obstacle by providing recommendations from others. 1974, Phelps files a $50 million class action lawsuit against Sears after a local outlet is several days late delivering a television set. Litigation continues for 6 years and is eventually settled with Sears paying Phelps $126, about $60 less than Phelps' son originally paid for the TV, which he never received. 1984, Phelps sues President Ronald Reagan, sending an ambassador to the Vatican, alleging violation of the constitutional guarantee of freedom of religion. Yeah, that one doesn't make any sense at all. Looking through this timeline is like following the breadcrumbs to a gingerbread house of crazy. But the biggest shift from annoying weirdo to full-on monster seems to have happened around 1979. From what I can tell, this was a major event in his life. In fact, it even got him temporarily disbarred. Apparently, it involved his conduct during a lawsuit against a court reporter named Caroline Brady. She had failed to have a court transcript ready for Phelps on the day he asked for it. Although it did not affect the outcome of the case, Phelps sued her for $22,000. Where he got that number is incredibly unclear. From there, things get a little weird. According to the Kansas Supreme Court, the trial became an exhibition of a personal vendetta by Phelps against Caroline Brady. His examination was replete with repetition, badgering, innuendo, belligerence, irrelevant, and immaterial matter, evidencing only a desire to hurt and destroy the defendant. The jury verdict didn't stop the onslaught of Phelps' abuse. He was not satisfied with the hurt, pain, and damage he had visited on Caroline Brady. He did end up losing that case, which was actually pretty rare. So, horrible, but not necessarily illegal, which can basically describe all of WBC's activities. But what tripped him up is what he did next. In an appeal, Phelps prepared affidavits swearing to the court that he had 8 witnesses whose testimony would convince the court to rule in his favor. Caroline Brady, on the other hand, obtained sworn signed affidavits from those 8 people in question, all of whom said that Phelps had never contacted them and that they had no reason to testify against Brady. As a result of the same case, Phelps will be suspended the following year from practicing in federal courts until 1982. Yeah, that was pretty weird. So I think it's safe to say that Fred Phelps was a little bit of a psychopath by at least this point in his life. After this moment, things get a lot more erratic and bizarre, as evidenced by the timeline. In 1986 and 1987, Phelps would receive 3 awards for his civil rights cases, including one bestowed by the NAACP. A year later, 1988, Phelps provides rooms for Democrat Al Gore's presidential campaign workers. Though the Phelps-Gore connection would grow increasingly distant, Phelps' oldest son, Fred Jr., is invited to the first Clinton-Gore inauguration in 1993. By 1998, Gore will be seen by such an enemy of the Westboro Baptist Church that its members picket the funeral of his father. Oh god. In 1992, running for the U.S. Senate, Phelps gets a remarkable 30.8% of the ballots cast in the Democratic primary, even though he terms his opponent as a, oh my god, I can't say that out here. 1983, Phelps files the first of 3 federal lawsuits against Washburn University Law School after 3 of his children are denied admission. The suit contends his children should be granted minority status and thus benefit from affirmative action because of their association with their father's civil rights legal work, probably the biggest legacy he left behind, due to a series of new laws that were passed, due to just how far him and his church pushed the right to protest. Largely in response to Phelps and his followers' harassment of gays and others, the Kansas legislature passed laws regulating funeral picketing and penalizing stalking, and amends a statute outlawing telephone harassment to include faxes. Seriously, again, wow. Fred. Good old Fred hate crime Phelps. You and your faxes. Listen, basically, you can see what you want to see with Fred Phelps. He ended up dying in March of 2014, and like I said, the Westboro Baptist Church is a lot weaker than it used to be. You can either see him as an impassioned civil rights slayer who also just happened to hate gay people, the good lawyer who only took cases to get money from, or somewhere in between with maybe a dash of mental illness sprinkled over it. But I will say this, and this is mentioned in Louis Theroux's final documentary with the church. Fred Phelps did end up getting excommunicated from the church before he passed. It's incredibly hard to find out specifically why. Basically, no one in the church will talk about it. That said, there were a few witnesses.
Near the end, he stood out on the porch of the church and looked across the street. There's this Equality House that's across the street and about a half a block down. It's all painted in rainbow colors, and that he had some kind words to say about him. And that's just not who my father was, right? So there's a part of you that thinks, wow, is it possible? Could it have been that he had the capacity to be a better person, you know?
So yeah, that was the video. Watch it or don't. Watch it again. Share it. Post it to YouTube. Post it to Twitter or not to Twitter. Post it to Reddit or somewhere else. Link, like, subscribe, follow, comment. Tell me what you want me to do. Tell me what you want me to say.